Good Monday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for August the 7th. Today, we are reading together here in the first chapter of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 1 is where we're going to get into today. Good to remember again that the original text of Samuel was just one big long scroll, but we have divided it up into a couple different sections, First Samuel and then Second Samuel. And the hinge point, I guess the cutting off point, the point of transition, is going to be the death of Saul. Saul has been killed in battle. I guess he was in battle and he died while the battle was going on, but he ended up killing himself. And in doing so, it creates a leadership vacuum to where there is now no official leader within Israel. It's good to remember as well that during his reign, because of his lack of faithfulness to Yahweh, because it doesn't, again, I'm becoming probably more and more convinced of just the absolute lack and absolute absence of faithfulness to Yahweh in Saul's life. Because of that, the kingship would be taken away from him, and also the lineage, the kingly lineage, would be taken away from him and given to someone else. So it'll be given to your neighbor. That ends up being David. So as we pick up here in 2 Samuel chapter 1, and as we see David being informed of Saul's death, you would probably assume that from David's perspective, this might be seen as a good thing, that now I can officially begin my reign over Israel. And yet we're going to see that's not exactly how David deals with this situation. It really is a testament to his character and to his love for Yahweh's anointed. And it really sends, I think, it sets a good example for us of how we should even think about those who might mistreat us and do us wrong. So let's read together here in 2 Samuel chapter 1. 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse number 1. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse number 1. After the death of Saul, David returned from defeating the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man with torn clothes and dust on his head came from Saul's camp. When he came to David, he fell on the ground and paid homage. David asked him, "Where have you come from?" He replied to David, "I have escaped from the Israelite camp." "What was the outcome? Tell me," David asked him. "The troops fled from the battle," he answered. "Many of the troops have fallen and are dead. Also, Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." David asked the young man who had brought him the report, "How do you know Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," he replied, "and there was Saul leaning on his spear. At that very moment, the chariots and the cavalry were closing in on him. When he turned around and saw me, he called out to me. So I answered, 'I'm at your service.' He asked me, 'Who are you?' I told him, 'I'm an Amalekite.' Then he begged me, 'Stand over me and kill me, for I am mortally wounded, but my life still lingers.' So I stood over him and killed him because I knew that after he had fallen, he couldn't survive. I took the crown that was on his head and the armband that was on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord." Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and all the men with him did the same. They mourned, wept, and fasted until the evening for those who died by the sword, and for Saul, his son Jonathan, Yahweh's people, and the house of Israel. David inquired of the young man who had brought him the report, "Where are you from?" "I'm the son of a resident alien," he said. "I'm an Amalekite." David questioned him, "How is it that you are not afraid to lift your hand to destroy Yahweh's anointed?" Then David summoned one of his servants and said, "Come here and kill him." The servant struck him and he died. For David had said to the Amalekite, "Your blood is on your own head, because your mouth testified against you by saying, 'I killed Yahweh's anointed.'" David sang the following lament for Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the Judahites be taught the song of the bow. It is written in the book of Yashar. "The splendor of Israel lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Do not tell it in Gath. Don't announce it in the marketplaces of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice, and the daughters of the uncircumcised will celebrate. Mountains of Gilboa, let no dew or rain be on you, or fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul no longer anointed with oil. Jonathan's bow never retreated. Saul's sword never returned unstained, and the blood of the slain from the flesh of the mighty. Saul and Jonathan loved and delightful. They were not parted in life or in death. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with luxurious things, who decked your garments with gold ornaments. How the mighty have fallen in the thick of battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. And I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were such a friend to me. Your love for me was more wondrous than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war have perished. And that is 2 Samuel chapter 1. Again, we're rolling right on from 1 Samuel into 2 Samuel here. And the last time we saw David was not in the last chapter, but in the next to last chapter, in chapter 30. Remember that David was at a very low spiritual point in his life. He was really pretending to be something that he was not. And what he was pretending to be was someone who was in league with the Philistines. He was going out to raid in the land of Judah, but was not raiding Judahites, but instead was raiding against those who were the enemies of Israel. But he was pretending to be on the side of the Philistines. So that the Philistines end up going off to war, and Achish thinks that David should naturally be on his side. David just keeps up the charade up until the point that the other Philistine leaders are like, hey, Achish, this ain't a great idea. This guy is pretty big deal in Israel. Probably not a good idea to bring him as we fight Israel, because it's a great opportunity for him to double cross us and to start fighting against us. So he goes back. Achish ends up sending David back. They go back to Ziklag, but remember, Ziklag had been raided by the Amalekites, this roving band of nomads. That was where I was trying to think of the other day that I couldn't remember. Nomads. And so they have to pursue them in order to get their wives and children and all of their band and possessions back. And that ends up happening in chapter 30. Well, then chapter 31 shifts the scene back to Saul and what's going on with him. And that's where he dies in chapter 31. So now the scene shifts back to David from his perspective. And he is just now learning that Saul dies. How does he learn about that? Obviously, he didn't see it on Twitter or Facebook. So you can only learn by word of mouth, and that mouth ends up being the mouth of this young Amalekite man who comes to David's camp and says, I've come from Saul's camp. I've seen the outcome. David says, what is the outcome? Well, the outcome is Israel has been defeated. Saul is dead. Jonathan is dead as well. Well, how do you know that? David asks. What's your proof that this is the case? And he says, well, I was there. I was on Mount Gilboa while all this was going on. I saw Saul leaning on his spear, mortally wounded. He called me. I answered. He said, kill me because I've been mortally wounded, but I'm still just hanging on by a thread. You need to end me. So this young Amalekite man claims that he did that he killed Saul, and that he took the crown and he took the armband and he presented these to David, it seems. Why would he do this? Because the question that we have, going back to chapter 31 of 1 Samuel, is that's not what's recorded there. What's recorded there is that Saul was wounded. Yes, the archers got to him. He told his armor bearer to kill him. The armor bearer would not kill him. So Saul ends up falling on his own sword. And then the armor bearer kills himself as well. And previous to this, Saul's sons had also been killed. So in that account, it is that Saul killed himself, took his own life. Here, the young Amalekite man says that he killed Saul. Which is it? Well, I tend to believe the narrative account, the details in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel, and recognize that this young man is lying. He's not telling the truth about what happened. Yes, he obviously was there having the crown and the armband, but he's lying because it seems that he would be thinking that this would be good news to David. Again, by all accounts, it seems that the rift between Saul and David was well known, even outside of Israel. And of course, with these Amalekites who wander in and around Israel, they would have heard about that as well. So he's thinking that, if I tell him that I took care of his enemy, that I killed his enemy, I should say, if I tell him that I killed his enemy, then maybe he will reward me in some way because I've set him up now to be on the throne. But David doesn't take it that way. Instead, David tears his clothes, and him and all of his people begin to mourn and to weep and to fast until evening for Saul's death and Jonathan's death and the death of Yahweh's warriors, and just for the nation as a whole, the death of the king was a sad event. It was a moment where mourning and weeping and fasting would be very appropriate. Following this, he asked the young man, "Well, where are you from?" And he says, "Well, I'm a resident alien. I'm a nomad. I'm wander around. I'm an Amalekite." And then David just comes down on him. The young man at this point is probably thinking, okay, something's not exactly right here, because I told them news that you think would be good news for him, and yet he's mourning and weeping. What's going on? And David just goes into him and says, "Listen, how is it that you are not afraid to lift your hand to destroy Yahweh's anointed? Why would you think this is okay and acceptable?" Now, David, of all people, had the right to say this, because he had expressed this own type of mindset in his own life. Going back to 1 Samuel chapter 24 and 1 Samuel chapter 26, David had the opportunity to kill Saul on 2 occasions, and he did not. Why? Because he knew it was not his place and was not right to raise his hand and to destroy Yahweh's anointed, even though he had been encouraged to do so by multiple people. So David sees this man as having committed a grave sin, a sin worthy of death. And David stands up and really carries out what is a kingly duty of executing the evildoer. And he does so here within this text. And he blames the man. He's like, "Your mouth testified against you. You're the one that said you killed Yahweh's anointed." David has no reason but to take the man at his word. He doesn't know what happened on Gilboa. But the fact that this man would even just claim to have killed Saul was enough for David to put him to death and to charge him with a capital crime. David goes on from here and sings a lament for Saul. You see David do this on a number of occasions. We're going to see that here in chapter 1, and also later on in chapter 3 and verses 33 and 34. Again, David sings a lament. We know he was the author of many psalms, so he obviously was a very talented musician. And he creates this song and tells the Judahites, those that are under him, that they must sing this song. It is known as the Song of the Bow. It's also written in the book of Yashar, which is a non-canonical historical account of Israel. It's also mentioned back in Joshua. In this, he speaks 3 times of the splendor of Israel lying slain. He says that in verse number 19. He says it again in verse number 25, that the mighty have fallen in thick battle. And finally, verse 27, the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war have perished. This all referring, of course, to Israel's armies as a whole being defeated, but specifically to David and Jonathan and his sons dying. And he doesn't want the enemies to boast. So don't tell the Philistines about this. They should not boast in this moment. Even Gilboa, the place where Saul was slain and Jonathan was slain, may it be a cursed land. Jonathan and Saul were valiant warriors. That's how David wants them to be remembered, as valiant warriors, verses 22 and 23. And even for Israel, they should be blessed, or they should count themselves fortunate to have been under Saul's reign, because it is apparent by what David says that he had blessed them during his reign, that they were clothed in scarlet, that they were decked with garment, or that their garments were decked with ornaments or with gold ornaments. And specifically verses 25 and 26, David just expresses love for his fallen friend, Jonathan. He says, "Your love for me was more wondrous than the love of women." Now, of course, some would like to take this and pervert this and misconstrue this, but it's just, again, we've already mentioned this, that these 2 men were warriors together, and they had been in the heat of battle, and there's nothing that draws men together than the heat of battle in a stronger way. And Jonathan loved David, and David loved Jonathan. So David here just expresses his sadness over the passing of Saul. And for us, as we read this, we might be just, might be left scratching our head a little bit, wondering, it's very interesting that David, who by the story that we know was mistreated by Saul in so many different ways, and yet David here shows a great deal of grace and forgiveness. He does not harbor ill will towards someone who mistreated him in a very real way. And he speaks about a lot of things that we just don't know. Again, the details that we're given in Scripture are seemingly minute compared to the entire history of Saul's reign. Remember, he reigned for, I believe, 42 years. So there's 42 years of history That is just very easily summarized in Saul's victories in battle and the way that he blessed his nation in a economic sense. What we focus on, because it's focused on with us, is his mistreatment toward David. But David does not hold this grudge. And that certainly, I think, is a very powerful example to us, that if David was not willing to hold a grudge against one who treated him so poorly, maybe we would do well to release any grudges that we might have against other people. I know for myself, I've been mistreated by people before. Do I allow that mistreatment? Do I allow that ill experience to cloud the way that I view them? I'll be honest with you. There's some people that have done me wrong, like legitimately done me wrong, not just me being petty, but legitimately treated me poorly, that I have to wrestle with whenever I see them, either in public or whether I see them on social media. My first thought, I have to purposely have a good thought for them, because the scars that remain for them are very real. But may God help us to release those things, because having a grudge, being just remembering all the poor things that people have done to us, that is a very polluting way of thinking. It's very toxic, and it can ruin us. In fact, you think about Saul, that's exactly that's one of the things that ruined Saul, was his inability to think well of others, specifically David. But David was not going to make that mistake himself. So may we take this example of David and learn from it, and allow our own hearts to not be polluted by a grudge or by ill feelings towards those who might have done us wrong. If there's anything else within this text that you would like to, highlight, or that you would like to have a question or pose a question about, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. We'll be back reading tomorrow from 2 Samuel chapter 2, which, again, with the death of Saul, that creates a vacuum in leadership. Who's going to step up to take on this leadership position? That's going to be the main subject matter of chapter 2 here in 2 Samuel that we'll read tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your Monday, everyone. Take care, and God bless.